It may not surprise you to know that Dad planned his own funeral service. That's not really what we're having here today, and we will have that service when the people that want to celebrate his life can gather together. But to remember him for now, Dad was born in Oxford on the 4th of October. Although he never really had an affinity with the place, as he was only there a few days due to his mother Edith being evacuated from wartime London for his birth. Dad had far more affinity with Durham, where his mum came from, and to where he made many family visits with his brother Clive. Dad's father Leslie was a Londoner, and the family lived in World's End, at the end of the King's Road. Back then it was a far cry from the rich area it is today. His Guinness Trust housing, which is still there today, didn't even have running water when he was young. Leslie was a pharmacist assistant and a window fitter at a time that London was getting taller. Edith a maid, and then enjoying the camaraderie of colleagues in a cake shop, leading to amazing spreads on our family visits, weekends to them. Dad attended church with his mum and was in the choir. The Reverend Geoffrey Barber had a soft spot for Dad and paid for him to attend youth camp in Prestatyn, Wales, when he was 16 years old. We think that would have been his first foreign trip. This is where he made a full commitment to his Christian faith, and he went again the following year. Dad left Westminster City School soon after then, with what he thought was 6 O-levels, to join Midland Bank, which became HSBC. However, one of his roles there was checking employees' credentials, so he sneakily wrote off and checked himself, only to discover that he'd actually passed physics and had achieved 7 O-levels rather than the 6. Banking qualifications followed, and Dad rose to the position of manager and worked across about 10 branches in his 32-year banking career. And this included specialising in the financial management of dentistry and wine. Now, this was in a day when banking was more personal, and Dad's amiable nature led him to relationships with some of his customers that stretched beyond work. And as a family, I remember us visiting Silverstone in the head of Esso Motorsports box, and a wine contact offered him his apartment in Saint-Tropez. For that holiday, Dad had been given a restaurant recommendation, and he booked. The 4 of us arrived for lunch at the small medieval walled town of Ez, just outside of Monaco. Having climbed the romantic cobbled streets, it became abundantly clear we were not appropriately dressed for La Chèvre d'Or, and it was going to cost a small fortune. Dad hesitated for all of a split second before barrelling in with, "My money is as good as anybody's," and the grin of a man determined he was going to enjoy his food and perhaps educate his family in their first truly posh meal. Sat there in shorts, with his t-shirt sticking to the varnish of the antique wooden chair, he conducted the bow-tie-suited waiters for each course on the synchronised removal of the silver-domed cloches from our food with a cheeky 3, 2, 1, go. Dad would try and help anyone, whoever they were, whatever their situation, sometimes if they wanted it or not. In the years afterwards, he would joke that I had to take Mum and him back there for the golden wedding anniversary, pushing him up in a wheelchair. So instead, we took him as a surprise for his 70th birthday. When I say surprise, we sat down to eat, and he got out pictures from that time, a quarter of a century before, and put them in the middle of the table. Somehow he'd worked it out, and we genuinely don't know how. Once the staff saw the photos, the formal service of a 2 Michelin-starred French restaurant immediately became warmer, and we received longing looks from the other diners over our special treatment. We were the first to arrive, the last to leave, and I'm sure all of you who've known him can picture it. Few would know from recent years, but in his younger days, Dad was actually quite shy. Mum was his first proper girlfriend, and when I say proper, I mean one that actually knew she was a girlfriend. He was taken by his friend Anne to a housewarming party, and there she introduced him to Mum, and 8 months later they were engaged. Not that they told anyone until his birthday a couple of months later. Mum tells me that she knew the proposal was coming due to several utterances of, "I have something to ask you," as he struggled to pluck up the courage in the grounds of Hampton Court. He got there in the end. Work and distance generally restricted meetings to weekends until they moved to Worcester Park after the wedding in June 1968 at Holy Trinity, Wallington. That became their first family home, not that I remember it, followed 6 years later by a move to New Malden, where its two ends have provided homes for 6 and then 40 years. Other than banking and his family, Dad had several hobbies. The main one being hockey. He represented Midland Bank at a high level and used to take Fiona and I on a Saturday to hang out at their Beckenham grounds whilst he played. He was also a keen Manchester United fan, following the Munich disaster and probably much to the horror of his dad and brother, having switched from Chelsea. Which, despite entailing rants on all the problems and what should be done about them, even when Manchester were winning, became infectious. And I put that down to the level of chocolate brought home on a Saturday when both he and they won. There were also calmer interests. A crossword most days, and interest in gadgets, including his own solutions to things around the house, and wildlife. He had a particular interest in watching small birds, who, being Dad, he couldn't stop himself from helping. This grew into disdain for pigeons and squirrels who stole the food put out for the little birds, leading to all sorts of methods to prevent this. Did our mocking deter him? Not one bit. Over the years, I've obviously seen him as Dad, but in the last few weeks it's been an honour to hear from so many people on how much a part of his character was helping others. This can be seen in the many roles and the work he undertook after leaving the bank. Even this week, Mum and I have benefited from lists he created on what to do following his death, some of which he even laminated. And a few unconventional topics of regular conversation Dad had. One of them was death, not something he was ever afraid of. At his family 50th birthday meal, much to our bemusement, he stated he would be happy to die soon as he'd lived a fulfilled life. He joked with me only a few months ago that God would be splitting the difference with him going at 75. He had a strong mind right to the end, outdoing me on mental arithmetic only a week before he died. And that would have pleased him, as perhaps his biggest fear was dementia, which only makes me prouder of him for how he cared for his mother through that. Having survived cancer once and lived with a long-term heart condition, when he learned his best shot at a cure, this time had failed, Mum, he and I went to a coffee shop. And after a brief moment, he broke the silence with, "Well, I don't have a bucket list." Of course he didn't, because that would have been self-centred. It was also an example of how he'd been raised in a house where humour plays a big part in keeping us grounded. A pun was never far away, and I'm sorry kids, you can blame Grandpa for passing that on to me. In his last few days, in great weakness and discomfort, we asked him if he wanted a blanket. His softly spoken reply, "Yes please, and 2 pints of lager." Now the hard bit. In his last few days, every departure was treated as a last. We all knew it, just in case. He would continually stress how much he loved us. And I took the final tear that rolled down his cheek, moments before he died, as exactly that, in many forms. I want to leave you with something. A few weeks ago, I started wearing glasses. Dad's first response was to help, to tell me how to clean them. And now I can't read because I've taken them off. You hold each lens, not the frame so as not to damage it, and you clean half of the lens and then the other half before switching to the other lens. So my ask is that whenever you clean glasses, do it like this, remember Dad, and think of how you can help someone. Clean for Ken. If you're watching the recording of this, please also watch Bart's address in a few moments, as without fail, all who've met him over the last weeks and months have been struck and inspired by the strength of Dad's faith. Doctors, nurses, carers, friends, family, and people far and wide that his journey has been shared with. Thank you, and I look forward to seeing you at his Thanksgiving service sometime soon.
John chapter 14, verses 1 to 6. Do not let your hearts be troubled. Trust in God, trust also in me. In my Father's house are many rooms. If it were not so, I would have told you. I am going there to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come back and take you to be with me, that you also may be where I am. You know the way to the place where I am going. Thomas said to him, Lord, we don't know where you are going, so how can we know the way? Jesus answered, I am the way, and the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. Both Ken and Andrea are much loved and valued members of the Emmanuel Church family. Indeed, they're the kind of people that make a church family feel like a church family. Ken was involved in so many areas of church life. The Ken-shaped hole that he has left at Emmanuel is enormous. He was, well, here are a few of the things, chair of our mission focus group. He was on the finance standing group. He was a duty warden, a PCC member. He was on the Oasis committee. He was on the prayer standing group. And actually the list could just go on and on. He was wonderfully servant-hearted in doing it all. And for 4 years, he was a church warden. Now, church wardens, we have 2 of them at Emmanuel, and they work very closely with me. And I loved having Ken as a church warden. His administrative skills really came to the fore, as well as his gentle and lovely and warm personality. He could be very persuasive. If we ever needed someone to get people to volunteer for things, it was Ken that we would choose, because with a clipboard in one hand and a loving hand on someone's shoulder and a warm smile, very few people could resist Ken. He was very good at doing that. In our staff meetings, he would join our staff meetings when he was church warden, and in one of them we read a chapter on church leadership, and one of the things it said was, it's good to ask one another at the start of a staff meeting, how are you doing really? Not just how are you doing, because then you just get the pat answer, but how are you doing really? And Ken picked up on that and would use it a lot with us in a very genuine way, very loving way. And our administrator was saying recently that even after he'd finished coming to staff meetings, he would often say that to her. And he did to me as well. How are you doing really? Because you knew he cared. You knew he loved you. You knew he wanted to know. And you knew he wasn't going to talk about you with anyone else. You could trust him. And of course there was his great sense of humour. The jokes could be corny. But the wonderful thing was he would groan with you. And then you'd laugh together. He'd get away with it somehow. Because it was Ken. When I visited Ken, I'm sure there'll be much more opportunity to speak about Ken at the Thanksgiving service. And many more things to say. When I visited Ken in the hospital a week and a half or so before he died, I thought the visit sort of summed up Ken in some ways. Even though he wasn't well and was clearly uncomfortable, he wanted to talk to me about me. He wanted to ask about me. He also wanted to know about the church finances. And as well as that, we had a laugh together. and he talked about Jesus. And actually, I know if Ken was here, he would be saying to me, it's time to stop talking about me, and it's time to start talking about Jesus. You see, Ken was very clear in the last days and weeks of his life, as has already been said, that he was looking forward to being with Jesus. And I want you to see from that passage in John that Paige brilliantly read for us. Thank you for reading it. I want you to see the reason why Ken had that hope. Because Ken's hope for life beyond this life wasn't based on himself. His eyes weren't on himself. And though he loved his family, his certainty of life beyond death wasn't because he loved them or because he was looking to them. No, his certainty about life beyond death was about what we see in this passage. There's one thing I want you to see, and it is this. Jesus' death is the only way to life. Jesus' death is the only way to life. That's what Ken's hope was. That's why his eyes were fixed on Jesus. Now just have a look at the passage. It's in the order of service if you want to have a little look at it. I want you to see what Jesus says here. Now Jesus has just told his closest followers that he's about to die. He said it in a roundabout way, but that's what he said. And his friends are confused and upset and asking questions, and yet Jesus is saying to them that actually it is essential for them that he dies. And so see in these verses what Jesus is saying he's going to do as he goes. And when he talks about going, he's talking about his death. See what he says about what he's doing as he goes. So I'll start at the beginning of the reading. It says, "Do not let your hearts be troubled. Trust in God, trust also in me. In my Father's house are many rooms. If it were not so, I would have told you. I'm going there to prepare a place for you." Jesus is saying, I'm going to prepare a place. What's the place? The place is life beyond death. It is life with Jesus forever. Jesus is saying, I'm going to prepare that place, which must mean if he doesn't go, if he doesn't die, then there won't be a place. Jesus' death is the only way to life. So how does Jesus' death prepare the place? Well, we all need to understand some bad news. The bad news is the terrible state that mankind is in. Our biggest problem is not coronavirus, although that is tragic. Our biggest problem is mankind's rebellion against God, what the Bible calls our sin. Now you might say, well, if you're not a Christian, you might say, well, I don't think I've rebelled against God, I haven't done that. But there's a quick and easy test to see if you have or not. It's a quick test and the results come back in seconds. You see, Jesus was once asked, what's the greatest commandment? And Jesus said, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind and with all your strength. And he said there's a second one, love your neighbour as yourself. And all we have to do is just take that test. How do we do with those commandments? Do we love God with all our heart, soul, mind and strength? Well, I know I can answer for myself, and I think I can answer for you, that the answer is no, we don't. We don't love God in all those ways. In fact, most people, we just ignore God most of the time. We take what God will give, but we ignore the giver. And as for the second commandment, loving our neighbours as ourselves, well, even Ken, who was a very loving person, wasn't perfect. We all say and do things that hurt others. So actually, the test results come back straight away, and we see that we've all fallen short. We've all rejected God, and therefore none of us deserve that place in life beyond death with God. If we've rejected God, God would be right to reject us. But Jesus says, I'm going to prepare a place. Jesus' death is the only way to life. You see, by dying, by taking our wrongdoing onto himself, by taking the punishment we deserve, Jesus prepares a place. You see, the cross shows us a couple of things, doesn't it? It shows us what we deserve, and it shows us God's love. That Jesus would come and say, I'll take that for you. And so when Jesus died, He took our wrongdoing so we could be forgiven if we'll come to him. And he prepared the place. And then do you see the wonderful promise that Jesus goes on to say? He says, and if I go and prepare a place for you, I'll come back and take you to be with me, that you also may be where I am. He's saying, I'm not going to leave anything up to you. I'm going to make sure that you're going to come and be with me. If I'm going to die for you, I'm going to make sure you're going to be there. And that's what he did for Ken. Walked him through the valley of the shadow of death to bring him home. And therefore, Ken would want me to urge you to listen to the last verse again, where Jesus says, I am the way, the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. Jesus is saying there's only one way to God, only one way to life. There's only one way to have our sins forgiven, and that's through Jesus. Now, some people say that's arrogant of Jesus, or arrogant of Christians to say that. But I don't think it really is. If this building were on fire and I were to say to you, they'd say there's only one fire exit. There it is. That's the way to get out. You wouldn't say, well, I'm not going through that. That just seems arrogant. No, you'd say, well, thank you for pointing it out. I think I'll go that way. Well, for Jesus to say that he is the only way is to say he's the only one who could die for us to deal with our sin. And therefore the challenge is, will you come to Jesus, as Ken did, and put your trust in him? Because if you do, when you come face to face with death, you too can look forward to life with Jesus forever. Now, if you want to find out more, do pick up, if you're here, pick up one of the booklets if you want to. As you leave, they're free. It's called Two Roads, and that will tell you more about how you can have life through Jesus. If you're not in the chapel, do click on the link on the order of service. There's one on the, on the back page, which would take you to the Two Ways to Live website. And you can click on that and find out more.
I'm so proud and privileged to have been Ken's wife for 52 years. He loved me unconditionally as I did him. He has been such an encourager and support to me all those years. Right from the start, Jesus has been the third person in our marriage, giving us guidance, protection and loving care. Ken and I were prayer partners throughout the years, and I'm missing talking and praying with him so much. Psalm 121 was our wedding psalm, and it says, Our help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. He watches over our lives and all our comings and goings, both now and forevermore. These words have proved so true over the years, and I know for sure that God will continue to do this now I am on my own. I've had some wonderful messages from friends during the past few days, and certain words describing Ken have come up time and again. Encourager, good listener, wise words, sense of fun, his warmth and his lovely smile. Ken was very much a people person, putting others so often before himself. His smile and giggle are something I hope I will never forget. Ken was an administrator by character and training. His attention to detail was so important to him, although to others and myself could sometimes be frustrating. If he couldn't solve a practical problem, he would either make it or buy a gadget that would do it. His administrative skills were never more clearly seen than in the last few weeks of his life, when he was often seen in our study on the computer. Initially, this puzzled me, as he had already given up his numerous church and local community responsibilities. As Ian mentioned, he had been working on an action pack, giving guidance on everything that Ian and I would need to do after his death. This was so thoughtful, thorough and kind, as were his video messages to Ian and family and myself, which I watched this morning. He was so brave. We were blessed with our 2 children. Sadly, Fiona was only lent to us for 17 and a half years, but it's a great comfort to know that she and her dad are now reunited in heaven. We've watched as Ian has grown into a mature man of God and a fine businessman, and he's been joined by our kind and loving daughter-in-law, Lisa, and our wonderful grandchildren, Bailey and Paige, who have given us so much pleasure over the years. The last 11 months since Ken's aggressive cancer diagnosis has not been easy. But Ken became more and more excited about meeting Jesus face to face and joining the worship in heaven. We are so thankful to friends who've prayed for us every single day during that time, and also to God's kindness in so many ways. A word that came up repeatedly in cards and messages was Ken's faith that's inspired so many people over the years. A couple of days after Ken's passing into glory, his consultant oncologist rang me and said what is a privilege it had been to meet Ken and treat him, and how struck he had been by Ken's faith. He had in fact previously given permission for Ian and I to visit Ken in hospital when there was a no visiting policy during lockdown. He said he wanted to give us as much quality time together. That weekend was a special time because it proved to be the last time that we were able to laugh, have an in-depth conversation and pray together, because on coming home a few days later, Ken quickly deteriorated. There is a huge Ken-shaped hole in my life, those of our family and friends and church family. I'm so grateful to God for bringing Ken and I together to share our lives. And although I miss him terribly, we had both acknowledged to each other, because of our trust in Jesus, that we will meet again in God's presence. Thank you.